This is the IDP After Show.
Welcome to the IDP After Show. I'm your host, Jase Abbey, and I'm so happy to be hosting this podcast this season, bringing you weekly preview episodes with some of the biggest names in IDP. And for this, the debut episode, it could not be more fitting that I get to welcome as my week one guest, the former host of the Read and React, my good friend and a titan in the world of IDP, Mr. Tom Kislingbury. Tom, you already know this from the many conversations we've had, but I want to make you squirm by saying on air for all to hear now that I was a huge fan of the show for many years, and I just hope that I can do you guys proud by continuing that legacy. How are you, dude?
Wonderful, thank you. And look, always great to be chatting football, and thank you for getting in. I mean, I sort of wanted to bring up the Read and React as well. Sticky and I handled it for a long time, but we inherited it from our predecessors as well. So EC, one of the greatest football minds I've ever known, and Bill sort of handled it way back in the day. I think it was like 2017, something like that. So, you know, that's gone quick. But yeah, it's been great fun. Back then, there was almost no IDP shows kicking around. And today there's a few and they're expanding. And you're a great person to be picking this one up. So couldn't be happier.
Too kind. So Tom, look, we're about to see some meaningful football action in the coming week, right? It feels like it's kind of been a long time coming. But that, for me, that lengthy gap between sort of February and now makes that opening game of the season even more exciting. What I love about week one, from a fantasy perspective, and especially from an IDP perspective, is that it presents some kind of unique challenges, doesn't it? It's the week where we tend to see the most surprises. That one guy we all thought would be, you know, an every down guy isn't, and that guy that we'd all kind of written off has a huge week. It's weeks like these that keep us humble, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's one of the 3 or 4 biggest moments in IDP for a year. So I always get a load of questions. As soon as the season starts, people go, who's going to be good next year? And you're like, I don't know, man. We haven't even sorted rosters out. So I think the biggest IDP moments of the year are directly after the draft, when a lot of people don't really understand what that does. Free agency and draft totally shakes up rosters, and unless you go through it manually, it's quite hard to see. Camp, which we've obviously just about come through, and you see all the interesting stuff shaking out, and week one. And those are your big moments where you've got a chance to get an advantage over your league mates, because apart from that, pretty much everyone's got the same information and they're all working at the same speed, but those are the big ones. So you need to understand after week one, in particular, what is a mirage, what numbers you can trust, what numbers you can't trust, and what big moves you should make. If you don't make any big moves, you're going to lose out. If you make too many big moves or the wrong big moves, then you're throwing away your own wonderful health voluntarily. You are doing IDP Brexit.
Absolutely. So look, let's help people get a fast start on week one and share what we've kind of been picking up over the course of the last few weeks and months. Let's get into this. So as I said during the intro at the top of this show, we're going to follow a similar format each week. My guest and I are going to discuss 4 linebackers, 4 defensive linemen, and 4 defensive backs. The guys who we think have a chance to either produce or disappoint in week one. But we do want our audience to drive some of the content for this show too. So to that end, we'll also touch on the player who our followers have nominated in a weekly poll on X. And this week, that man was Rams linebacker Omar Speights, who has been generating a lot of buzz after Ernest Jones was traded to the Titans. But for now, let's kick things off with our nominations at linebackers. So Tom, which player at the position do you think has a good chance to be productive in week one?
Well, I think we're going to fall out on this straight one. I'm going Troy Andersen of the Falcons. There's a few things I really like about Troy, but I'll get onto that in a minute. The one thing I don't like about him is he's one of the most annoyingly misspelt names in the NFL. It's Andersen, E-N, like Norwegians do it, not O-N, like Swedish people do it. I just had to get it out of my chest. So I really like Troy Andersen. He got drafted into a really good situation a couple of years ago, but there was always going to be a bit of a time limit. So he walked into a team where that gap was not open. There was not space in that team. And they've been through some coaching changes and everything like that. But now last year he walked into it and it was his job to lose. And then sadly he got injured and he was in and out a little bit. And then he got injured and missed the rest of the season. season. So he's basically been in the NFL for a couple of full years already and not really done anything. But I think he's absolutely got the ability to win that every down linebacker role in Atlanta. I think there's one of them. I'm not entirely convinced who it's going to be, so we'll need to see. But definitely, I think people are jumping on Caden Ellis and Nate Landman because Caden Ellis had a really good IDP season last year. Is a good player. I'm not convinced. Nate Landman definitely is a bit efficient, a tackler, or he was once. But I'm not sure he's that good. I think Troy Andersen could be the best NFL player and therefore could be the single every down linebacker there. I'm not going to put my mortgage on it. I'm certainly not even that confident. But the name of the game for linebackers is getting top 30 linebackers without paying top 30 prices. So I don't care about a guy you can draft at 22, where I think he's going to be number 14, whatever. That's just margin of error. I want a guy that's getting drafted outside top 30. So I like Troy Andersen.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me, right? Because I'm pretty confident that the Caden Ellis is going to be one of the full-time guys there. And like you said, coming into last year, we all thought Andersen was going to be the other guy. And then obviously things didn't go his way, injuries, etc. Nate Landman came in and kind of surprised us all. No one really knew who he was until that point. But he wasn't perfect. But he's a good run defender. And I'm tempted to say that I see like a split role between Andersen and Landman, where Landman would be in on obvious rundowns, and Landman would be in on obvious rundowns, and then Andersen would be in on obvious passing downs. But that's kind of built on this idea that fast, speedy linebackers are always good in coverage. And Andersen is a fast, speedy linebacker, but we haven't seen that he's any good in coverage yet. So I'm a little bit hesitant to kind of anoint him as, and I know you're not anointing him, but I'm hesitant to anoint him as that guy alongside Ellis for now.
Yeah, look, all of that is totally fair, and I'm not that confident in him. And it's probably because I quite liked him as a rookie. I quite like the value he's going there. And we hold on to these beliefs, right? You go, how often you have a fight about a player, and somebody goes, "Oh, I liked him coming out," and you go, "Brilliant, that's totally useless." I've got a friend, and every time he keeps telling me that you like Sam Bradford coming out, or what's the other Sam? The other terrible quarterback went to the Jets. Sam Rosen. Anyway,
Sam Rosen. Yeah,
every single one. Like it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much you liked him if he hasn't done it in the NFL, whatever. So I'm guilty of that. I'm holding on to it, but I'm still drafting Troy Andersen because nobody else seems to want him.
I hear you. So let's move on to my guy, right? So I've gone with Robert Spillane of the Raiders, and I'll preface this by saying that I know that nobody is going to get too excited by inserting Spillane into their IDP lineups, right? He's definitely improved as a player in the last few years, but that tackle efficiency was pretty average last year amongst all linebackers, and he does need that snap volume to keep pace with the best players at the position. But for me, he's super reliable. He never comes off the field, and there's very little competition to worry about in that Raiders linebacker room. So, although that argument does apply to many other linebackers, I've singled out Spillane this week because I like that matchup with the Chargers. So Justin Herbert will be ready to go, it sounds like, after that foot injury, but he's not going to be 100%. Unfortunately, those kind of injuries, the plantar fasciitis, they tend to linger. So I think we're going to see what Harbaugh kind of wanted to do from the outset, but even more. So he's going to lean on the run. We might see a lot of quick passes. And that's kind of where Spillane, I think, can excel this week. So I think it presents a great opportunity for him to rack up the tackles, maybe Christian Wilkins as well, maybe Max Crosby. And I think it's a great week a great matchup for Spillane to get off to a really fast start. So what say you, Tom? Are you on board with Spillane this week?
Totally. Love Spillane. And you talked just now about good athletes and coverage ability, and they're not the same thing at all. I would argue Spillane's a pretty good example. I don't think he's a great athlete. I don't think anybody ever watched Spillane play for the Steelers or the Raiders and go, wow, look at that change of direction. He's amazing. But he's a good coverage player. He's really solid, and he knows his role, and he doesn't deviate for it. And that's mostly what coverage is. It's not about matching a wide receiver step by step. Not when you're a linebacker in the NFL. It's about discipline and knowing where to go. So I love him. I still think people love Divine Diablo too much because he's got a cool name and everybody sort of jumps on him too much, but Spillane's the guy.
Yeah, it is a cool name, let's be honest.
Really cool.
Yeah, I mean, Diablo he's going to be the second guy there. I think obviously they got Eichenberg, but he's a fifth rounder, right? So he's not going to be challenging someone like Spillane this year. So yeah, I'm all in on Spillane this year. I've got him in a bunch of leagues, and yeah, as I said, I don't get too excited about inserting him in my lineup. He's not he's not a Roquan Smith. He's not an Owusu-Koramoah. We're not pretending he is, but I can drop him in there and kind of forget about him. I know he'll do me a job and he'll be reliable.
Yeah, the name of the game is just full-time linebackers. I expect him to be one, so he's going to be in there. I've come up with another name I want to talk about that I didn't tell you about. Can I do that? Sorry, this is why Mike gets really annoyed when he podcasts with me, and John Macri gets really annoyed as well. I want to talk about our boy Demario Davis. So Demario Davis is one of those guys that everyone thinks is dead. And is not. They just think he's fallen off the face of the earth, and he's not even playing anymore, and he's 100 years old, and he can't do anything, and blah blah blah. He's still the best linebacker in New Orleans, and I think he's still really good. Okay, he's not as versatile as he used to be. He's definitely not matching a receiver step for step, but he's a really good player. He's transitioned a bit more to a blitzer over the years, but he's still scored quite well doing it. So I think Demario Davis is one of those every down linebackers who's getting dropped because of perceived age. Like, is there a link between tackling efficiency and IDP scoring in age? No, there's not. So ignore it.
Yeah. I hate to disagree with you on your opening two players, but
no, it's good. Do it.
Yeah, like you say, he's a very good player, even though he is approaching 100 years old. But that tackling efficiency does worry me. I think he was one of the worst last year, and
it was.
I tend to overlook that when there's been a change in defensive coordinator. But I think Ulbrich is back again with the Jets, and so I'm not really envisaging a massive change for Davis this year. Does make me a bit concerned. Obviously, tackling efficiency gets affected by a lot of other factors, and we don't always track those. So other personnel changes, for example, can have a huge impact on tackling efficiency, right? Who's playing up front? Who's he playing alongside? But I don't really foresee a lot of changes for Davis. Like you said, he has become that blitzer, and some blitzers can, still rack up good tackle volume, but I worry that Davis might not be one of those. And will we see that trend continue from last year? Because if it does, even if he gets to 1,000 snaps plus, he's not going to keep pace with those tackle leaders at the position. That's my concern.
It's definitely a risk. And, the other linebacker that was the worst tackle efficiency in the NFL last year, off the top of my head, was Levante David, right? But he's one of those guys. Sorry, not Levante David, Devin White. And Devin White's IDP value appears to be bulletproof because people go, he had that one amazing year years ago, therefore he's brilliant. He'll keep doing that every year. So they're both obviously high risk, high reward. That's what pass rushers are. So it depends on the league and the settings and how many you're starting and the scoring and all that sort of stuff. But I'm just a bit of a sucker for guys who I think are going to play a load and other people don't think they're going to. So he's on my list.
Okay, good stuff. So any linebackers that you don't like this week? Any guys you're fading?
I can hear Mike Wallet whispering in my ear, going, "You hate every linebacker. It's every single one." I tell you the two that I don't like very much. First, I'm going for JOK. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in Cleveland, who, he came out of college and people are like, oh, he's small and fast and he can play in the slot and a bit of safety. He's going to be amazing because people think versatility equals point scoring. It's not. It's bad. He's never been the guy. He's never been a full-time player. The Browns have never shown that sort of faith in him. I don't think they will. But again, cool name, relatively early draft capital. I think he was right at the start of the second round, off the top of my head, and everyone sort of knows him. So he's definitely being drafted as a top 30 guy, and I wouldn't touch that with a barge pole.
Yeah, I'm one of those who wants him to be the guy, right? And that new contract does make me wonder if they intend for him to be more of the guy this year than he has been in years past. But 85% of snaps. I heard Mike talk about this as well. Like he talked about JOK being a potentially 85% or above linebacker this year. He wasn't far off that last year though, and it doesn't really matter about talent all that much, which is a real shame to admit. But if I've got a guy who's playing every down, like a Spillane, for example, or a much better player who I think JOK is, then I'm going to opt for Spillane every time.
Can I talk about that 85% thing? And sorry, we're sort of having this chat. I've had this chat with Mike a load of times, so we'll do it. That really scares me because we say, like in everyday parlance, 85%, you get 85 is nearly 90 and 90 is nearly 100. So how different is it? 85% linebacker, which is relatively common in these days of single linebackers and zero linebacker shells, is about 10 snaps a game. So average NFL game is about 66.5 snaps. 15% of that takes down 55, 56, something like that. So let's say 10 snaps a game. Over a course of a season, 17 games, it's 170 snaps. That's the equivalent of nearly 3 full games. Now, even if you factor in injury, because only 40% of starting linebackers play in every game in the season, it's still going to be equivalent to a couple of games. If you're going, it's fine, I'm only giving everybody else, all his 100 peers, an extra 3 games over him, that terrifies me. I don't want to give him any games at all, let alone 3.
So my nomination for a linebacker who I'm fading this week is Junior Colson of the Chargers. And this one's just pretty straightforward. We all know he is probably the future at linebacker for the Chargers. We've talked a lot about how, he's got that talent to be a potential 3-down guy. We all have talked about, to some extent, that familiarity with Harbaugh and Jesse Minter from their time at Michigan. But even with all those points going in his favor, he is a rookie. And we've learned by now that rookie linebackers generally take time to find their feet at this level, right? So that is especially so in Colson's case, I think, where he's missed time. He's had appendicitis. It's slowed his preparation for the season ahead. I think he's definitely, in my opinion, going to start really slow, be involved to a lesser extent. I'm not Denzel Perriman's biggest fan. I think he's overrated, but I think he'll certainly start the year as a full-time guy. Henley looks very likely to be slotting in alongside him. Henley's been running with the ones all throughout training camp. I'm pretty confident that, it will take time for Colson to work his way into that rotation. And for that reason, as is the case with almost every rookie linebacker, I suggest we bench him for now. Anything to add on this one, Tom?
No, I totally with you on position. We talk about rookie corners a lot and how difficult that is to adjust. I would argue linebacker is probably even harder these days because of the difference in coverage shells. So the NFL loves young cornerbacks, and okay, it's hard. They can get burnt, and when they get burnt, it looks really, really bad. But the difference from college linebacker coverage schemes to pro linebacker coverage schemes is night and day. It's so different. Now, corner, sure, it's really hard playing man coverage with really big and hard, fast people, and it's really hard playing zone against really, really smart, savvy professionals. But linebacker just get rinsed over and over and over again as rookies. And Harbaugh is nothing if not pragmatic, right? He's got his guys, sure, but he's not stupid.
Okay, Tom, so linebackers done. Let's talk about some defensive linemen. Who do you think is a good bet for week 1?
A good bet. I tell you, I'm going to take someone on the opposite side of what you talked about before. You talked about the Chargers being a good matchup for someone going up against them. I'm going to take a Chargers player here. I'm going to go for Joey Bosa. So Joey Bosa has been a player I've loved since he's been in the NFL, and everyone's loved Joey Bosa, right? He's been really good. I always say with Joey Bosa, he was very rarely in that proper top elite. Myles Garrett, Max Crosby now, the other guys. There's only 4 or 5 of them at a time. And occasionally he was just about in that. Nick Bosa, his brother. And Joey probably hasn't been up there for a while, but he's been injured for a while, right? And he's one of those players everyone goes, oh, he's injured, he can't stay healthy, he's never going to be healthy, blah, blah, blah. So I'm gonna pull your attention, I know you'll know this, to another Chargers player who people thought would always be injured, could never stay healthy, Keenan Allen. Do you remember early career Keenan Allen? Oh, it's always something. He's got, and then he missed 2 games in 6 years or something. He was just healthy, and it's a really good example that injuries are just injuries. They happen, and you can't defend against them. But it's very rare that a player is actually injury prone. So I think Joey Bosa has as much chance as his brother of staying healthy this year and playing really well. Maybe not quite as well because he's not one of the best edge rushers in the NFL, but he's at his best, and I think he can be at his best. He's definitely in the top 12 edge rushers in the NFL, and I don't think he's getting credit for it. So give me Joey Bosa over Khalil Mack any day of the week.
Yeah, right there with you, right? So Joey Bosa, we were talking the other day at the IDP show about guys who, if you could just see their end of season stats, who would you go for? So I was talking about guys that were kind of like those people that we assume are going to like take on bigger roles, the Trenton Simpsons of the world, those sorts of guys, Dayan Henley. But yeah, Joey Bosa was one who came up because, you know, if he stays healthy, his pass rush metrics are always up there with, I'm not going to say, like you said, he's not with the best of them, but he is a really good player. And it is really just health that holds him back. Edge 23, he's going in ADP in the best ball drafts.
Yes, please. I love that.
Yeah.
So he's just outside, right? Well, let's do the elite tier now. Is Nick Bosa, is TJ Watt, is Myles Garrett,
Parsons.
Micah Parsons, obviously. Arguably Triple X Max Crosby, arguably, and that's it, right? So there's those 5 guys, and then the next tier is probably 10 or 12 deep from like number 6 down to number 18, something like that. All of those guys are relatively similar, and I would definitely say Joey Bosa is in that list for me.
Yeah, you could argue maybe Josh Allen is in a tier of his own below that top tier, and then
maybe
like you say, the rest of those all we need is health from Joey Bosa. But I do feel like I kind of do sympathize with his IDP managers, because it does feel like we've been saying that for quite a few years now. And unlike the Keenan Allen example you gave us earlier on, and Keenan Allen had a lacerated kidney. That's not the kind of injury that keeps coming back, right?
Yeah, I remember that. It was horrible.
Yeah, with Bosa, it's these foot injuries. You know, they seem to keep coming back again and again. And I'm not going to say I'm starting to lose faith, but
it's only 2 years.
It's a real struggle to see.
Look, it feels like a long time now because it's the 1st of September. So when we're thinking back to the last season when he was properly healthy, 2021 was not just a year ago or a year before that. It was half a year before that. So it's 2.5 years, and then you had that season. But 2021, he rushed the passer 468 times, which is really high. And he had about 70 pressures, right? So he was a nigh on, okay, not elite, but a really good edge rusher, apart from 2 seasons. And that's easily recoverable from.
Yeah, I don't disagree. The hand injury that he's got currently kind of just feels like, oh God, here we go again, right? But yeah, he's got every chance to stay healthy. Every chance? Maybe that's a bit of a stretch. He's got a chance to stay healthy. And yeah, at that value, what did I say? Edge 23, edge 27. That's you know, you're not going to find a more talented player at that position. It's just all about that health. So let's fingers crossed he can stay healthy.
So where's Mac in ADP? Sorry, I'm taking you down a rabbit hole here, because I bet he's higher. I bet he's higher.
Edge 11.
There you go. So even if you're going, he can't stay healthy, we worry about him, he's getting on a little bit. Khalil Mack is old, right? He's proper old. And okay, he had a really good year last year. It wasn't just his finishing. There was a couple of other things to it. But I'm not confident in Khalil Mack staying healthy at all.
Yeah, and you know, you factor in the age as well. I mean, how old is Mac? Like 33? I know Bosa is no spring chicken, but you know, he's got age on his side at least. So
right.
Yeah, I'd prefer Bosa over Mac for sure. So my choice here, defensive lineman who I dislike is Byron Young. So, I mean, look, he deserves credit for what he did last year. 50 pressures, 8 sacks, 53 tackles. You know, it's impressive enough, especially for a rookie. But we have volume to thank for some of that production. He finished 5th amongst all edge rushers in total snaps, really healthy. But he was 77th out of 125 in pressure rate and 88th out of 125 in win rate. So that just, again, that kind of like, you know, that accentuates that point that I'm making about how it was mainly volume that really helped him last year. I have some doubts about whether he'll see similar volume this year. They drafted Verse, you know, Michael Hecht is still kicking around. And like I said, you know, he stayed healthy all year, didn't miss a game, which is rare, let's be honest. So yeah, but even so, that's not my main concern for now. My problem with Young this week is that I think he'll have his hands full. The Rams play Lions. We know Sewell and Decker are really good offensive tackles. Arguably, I think the best tandem at tackle in the NFL. I know Sewell's been nursing an ankle injury, but Dan Campbell kind of thinks that he'll be good to go. So I think if IDP managers have a comparable edge to pivot to instead of Young this week might be the week to do it. Any insight on Young, Tom?
No, I'm totally with you. trusting guys who played a lot of volume but weren't that good is generally a losing bet. So don't do it. Also, the other problem I've got with Byron Young, there's another Byron Young who's a defender in the NFL. And I hate guys, for any XL nerds, two players that have the same name, absolute disaster. So no, don't do that.
Yeah, it makes life hell, right? So I also noticed that I skipped over my defensive lineman that I like. So I'm gonna go back to back here, Tom. Sorry to talk a lot here, but I'm gonna talk up Trey Hendrickson of the Bengals this week. And there's three reasons I'm championing Hendrickson. And firstly, he's just that good. He's coming off a career year. Last year he had 20 sacks, finished top 10 in pressure rate and win rate. And it was nothing new. He's been one of the best edge rushers for the last sort of 4 or 5 years or so. Secondly, he's got a really nice matchup this week. He lines up almost exclusively on that right edge, and that left tackle spot for the Patriots is a real weakness, right? They've got Vidarian Lowe or Owusu-Koramoah there, and Lowe was terrible last year. Allowed a pressure on 13% or 1 in every 7 or 8 pass blocking snaps. And he's currently banged up with an oblique injury as well. Okorafor was a little better elsewhere, obviously, but he's nothing special whatsoever. And he's barely ever played a snap at left tackle in the NFL. So yeah, for those two reasons, enough. I like Hendrickson this week, but I've got a third reason as well. Every Bengals edge rusher seems to be injured right now. Sam Hubbard's been nursing a knee injury. We've got Miles Murphy and Cam Sample on IR. I think, Lou Anarumo is going to be leaning even more heavily on Hendrickson than he has in the past. And, what better opportunity, I think, for Hendrickson to get a fast start for a player who's that talented against the Patriots, who have got weak tackles, and in a week when every Bengals edge rusher is hurt.
Yeah, I like it. The Bengals have beefed up their interior as well. Last year, I thought it was a bit of a weakness. They drafted Chris Jenkins, or son of Chris Jenkins, relatively early. Zach Carter's there, looking healthy and looking good. I think that's an interesting looking one. My question with the Bengals ends, and I've yet to have a good answer on this one. Now, there's lots of people in the world, millions of people in the world who've forgotten more about game planning than I will ever know. But when you've got the Bengals who love their starters, right, edge in particular, they're like, these guys are going to stay on the field until they can't anymore. You've got Sam Hubbard, who is a blah, 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 cliche term, blue collar, run stopping, edge setter guy who's not the best pass rusher. And Trey Hendrickson, who's a brilliant speed rusher. He's got that lovely outside move. He's got those long arms. He can really set the edge. But he's terrible in the run game. He's a pile inspector. He wants no part of stopping the run. Surely that's really easy to game plan against them. You just go, I'm gonna stick an extra man blocking on Trey Hendrick's side, and I'm gonna run at Trey Hendrickson when I get a chance. How hard can it be? But teams don't do that, and I don't really understand that why. So my point is going nowhere because I don't know the answer. It feels like it should be an answer.
No, you're right. I mean, his tackle production or tackle efficiency is definitely in that Yannick Ngakoue, Bryce Huff category, right? He's gonna get you no more than 2 a week. It's going to be a rarity if he gets you more than 2 a week.
Yeah, can I talk about a lineman I don't like? And this
Go ahead.
It's a weak one and a longer thing as well. It's a guy a lot of people like because people form these really intense emotional ties to a guy you didn't have to pay a lot for and had a really good season last year, and people feel very strongly about them. I'm going Derrick Brown of the Panthers. So interior player rather than edge. So depending on your settings of the league, if you're playing combined DL, then you probably don't care too much about a non-pass rushing interior guy anyway. But last year he was absolutely brilliant at IDP because of all those tackles. He had one of those years where he went tackle, and he's going to absolutely pile up. So I think his tackle efficiency was over 11%, something like that. So every 9 snaps he's getting a tackle compared to most interior players who had high fives. 6.5% is doing really well. Like 7% is excellent. So it's just it was way beyond everybody else. Now you could go, oh, he's that sort of guy because he's a really good run stopper and blah, blah, blah. Insert your cliche here. But he's really not. Like the rest of his career, he hasn't done that. Sure, he's a good run stopper, but his tackle efficiency was not great at that because guess what? People don't normally run directly at your brilliant run stopping tackle. So the player I draw attention to is Christian Wilkins. who, if we zoom back to, I was going to talk about that. If you go all the way back to 2022 in the distant past, Christian Wilkins had one of those seasons where he had way more tackles, more tackle efficiency than all other interior players. And people were like, oh, they figured out how to use him, or he suddenly got good or whatever. And last year, it's disappeared. It was just one of those things that happened for a season. That happens in IDP all the time. And I think that's going to be Derrick Brown this year. He's a solid player. He's not a top 3 in the draft player. He's not by far the best run defender in the NFL, something like that. And he's very unlikely to have those same tackles again. So I would caution heavily against that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I want my defensive tackles to have a pretty good tackle floor, but also to be pretty capable when rushing the passer as well. Buckner for me is that guy that immediately comes to mind. He always produces pretty good tackle numbers. He always produces pretty good pass rush numbers as well, sacks. But he's never top 2, top 3 in both categories. Very few players ever are. But yeah, he's one of those guys that offers a little bit of something in both categories for me. Brown is very one-dimensional. Like you said, we saw Wilkins produce otherworldly tackle numbers just not last season, but season before last. And then last season, it wasn't terrible in tackle in terms of tackle volume, but it wasn't nearly where it was the year before. So yes, you're right to caution people on that one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we were talking about before, right? Put your faith in certain things and don't put faith in other things, and tackles are on that list. So when we talk about things that we think we know about IDP, the fact that the tackle is the basic currency of IDP, if we were setting the system up now, we probably wouldn't do that. I've said this for years. Tackles are not something a player does. Tackles are something that happened to a player. And if you get your head around that and stop thinking he had a load of tackles before, so he's going to have a load of tackles before, you'll be way better at making decisions.
Yep, tend to agree, dude. Tend to agree. So I think we're done with defensive linemen, unless you have any others you want to talk about.
Going to talk about one real quick one that's going to make everyone upset. Justin Madubuike of the Ravens. So love Justin Madubuike. Amazing season last year. And he's probably one of the top 8 interior rushers in the NFL. Love that. But last year he had a sack in 13 games off the top of my head, something like that. It's like 9 in a row. And I checked. It took me ages to check. No one's ever done that. No one's ever done that before. It's the most consistent weeks in terms of having a sack, which is mostly what IDP managers want, that anyone's ever had. Now, I think he can be really good again. I think he can have a solid year. He's not going to do that again. Like when someone does something that no one else has ever got close to, your starting point should be he probably won't do it again, even though he just did it. So love him. I suspect he's getting drafted probably way too high in drafts, and I want no part of that.
Let me check. As I'm checking, I will say that I do agree with you again. So he's being drafted as the DT4 right now, which to my mind is too high. So and what everyone will hear when we say this, Tom, is that we hate Justin Madubuike, which is not what we're saying.
Not
right?
True. If I could draft him at 8, I'd be really happy. But 4, I'm guessing Jeffrey Simmons is probably down 7-8 instead, and I'd want Jeffrey Simmons at 4 above Madubuike.
Well, it's funny you should ask, Tom. I'm just going to go and check now. He's DT5 actually.
Oh, okay. Well, that's better than I thought. But I'd still flip them the other way around. Yeah.
Wilkins 6, Lawrence 7. I'd prefer Lawrence myself.
Ooh, yeah, I totally do. Dexter Lawrence is arguably the best interior player in the NFL. I mean,
well, here's an interesting one. We're going to go off on a tangent here very briefly to talk about one of my favorite players, but Jalen Carter is DT8. What's your thoughts there?
Oh, interesting. I was talking about him at the pub on Friday, and we're like, Jalen Carter, he starts like a house on fire and it sort of fades a little bit. So let's see him do it again. I spent the afternoon with the president of his college alumni in London. So
oh, really?
Yeah, they're a good night out. So you want to get in with them. Yeah, I mean, it falls off really quickly, right? And we talk about having the elite. An interior line is the most set elite there is, apart from tight end in fantasy football. So tight end is very deliberate, and you've got Travis Kelce, and then you've got like 4 guys, because really there's only 5 teams in the NFL or so that consistently target the tight end. That's it. And a lot of them don't bother doing it. And defensive tackle is the same. There's never more than about 4 elite defensive tackles, maybe 5, but they stay there for a long time. So the good thing about those 2 positions is they stay there for a long time. If you are in that elite, you're going to stay there for 5, 6, 7, 8 years on average, which is not true at a lot of other positions. They're way high turnover. So if you can get in there, absolutely brilliant. Those guys we're talking about, they're borderline. They might be there, but they're not quite there. And we're going to have to see a certain amount of turnover this year anyway. Obviously, Aaron Donald is gone. Pour one out for him. And it's probably going to be the most turnover there has been at that position for a few years. But the only players I'm really confident are in there is Chris Jones, Dexter Lawrence, who we talked about, and Jeffrey Simmons, who sure didn't have a great year last year, but he was still pretty good, and everything went horribly wrong for the Titans. So I want those three, and then the other guys are pretty much in order after that.
Yeah, I'm a huge Carter fan. I know he dropped off a little bit towards the from the middle of the season onwards, but I think people sometimes forget that he was a rookie. Was it a rookie wall? You know, he kind of struggled for the snap volume of a lot of other DTs at the position when you consider that he was fighting with, the Fletcher Cox and who's the big guy whose name I forget that they drafted the year before, Jordan Davis.
Oh yeah, really big guy.
Yeah, really big guy. But Cox is gone. I think this is going to be. I saw something on Twitter that said, "No, what player are you most looking forward to this year? Which player are you really excited about this year?" And it should be for me the team I support, but it's not, right? Jalen Carter for me is probably the guy I'm most looking forward to seeing this year, and by that I mean looking forward to seeing whether he can, with slightly more snaps, with more of a snap volume, kind of keep pace with the leaders at the position, because I think he is the next big thing. And it really annoys the hell out of me that in two of my home leagues, I can't seem to get him for love nor money. No one wants to give him up, and I missed out on him in the draft by a whisker. So yeah, it pains me to see Carter do well, but I'm desperate to see it. I'm a huge fan.
Here you go. Here's my Bulldogs cup holders that have come home. Yeah, I'm with you. So the first 4 or 5 weeks of last season, I was writing up and going, the numbers that Jalen Carter is putting up are elite. And to see this at the very start of his career, you look at him now, and I was telling people, go and buy him now, because I know he's going to be expensive, but he's never going to be cheaper than this. He never will be. And it's sort of tailed off a little bit, but I'm definitely with you. He's probably got the most ceiling of where he is now to where he could be of any interior lineman. So yeah, I love that sort of value.
Totally. I know that people talk about Cansey, and I'm a big fan of Cansey as a pass rusher. But when we're talking early on, as we were, about guys that offer a little bit of something in terms of tackle volume and as a pass rusher, Cansey's never going to be a 50+ tackle a year guy. He's going to be a pass rusher, and he's going to be a really good one. But Carter has the pass rush potential, and he'll produce tackles as well as a run stuffer. I remember, and I wrote about this last year, about how his position coach, whose name I forget, talked about how Carter was the best of all of the interior defensive linemen who'd been drafted out of the same college combined. So whose names I will completely forget now. Logan Hall was one of them. Obviously, Jordan Davis was another, and there was a third guy as well. But yeah, Carter, I can't wait to see it, dude. I'm really
absolute stacked team. Look, we'll get you down on Saturday night, and we'll go and watch it with the Dogs alums here in London. It's some fun. We're talking about linemen. There's one more I really want to talk about. I promise I would do. I promise I'll be quick. John Franklin Myers. My boy John Franklin Myers, who's been there for years in the Jets, on the Jets, and arguably been their best defensive lineman, but he never gets the credit. And people always go, "Oh yeah, his natural position is playing inside. He's stuck playing on the edge, even though he's clearly playing edge." Because as soon as someone gets to 6'6" or 6'7", people go, "Oh, he should be inside." It's like, well, his NFL coaches don't think so. Maybe you should listen to them. So the Broncos are a really interesting team this year. Obviously, the defense last year started, and they looked like the worst defense in the NFL. It got better. They had very, very, very little on the edge. I think Franklin Myers could turn up there, and I'm hoping they go, you know what? Big fella, get out on the edge and just wreak havoc out there. And if that happens, and if he gets decent volume, I really like JFM.
Yeah, and the good thing about JFM, and I know this because I picked him up specifically for this reason in some of my NFL leagues, is that he has DT eligibility, which I'm sure will get changed now that I've picked him up. I've kind of I've tainted that for everyone. But if that remains, as you said, we know he's going to play plenty of snaps on the edge. Is kind of I'm going to call it a cheat code. That phrase gets thrown around too loosely, I think. But yeah, it's definitely an advantage, I think, if you can find JFM on MFL, and if he keeps that DT eligibility, then yeah, watch out.
And he's got a song. We talked about this off air, but NFL players who've got a song. So talking about Georgia, do you remember the great running back, Noshawn Moreno? Every time he scored, me and my buddies would sing, "I second that in Ocean." And John Franklin Myers, if anybody doesn't know, when his name is mentioned, you have to sing "Your Love Keeps Lifting Me Higher and Higher" to it. So John Franklin Myers, John Franklin Myers, John Franklin Myers, and it's brilliant to do it.
That right there is the highlight of our show, Tom. I'm so glad you did that.
More NFL players should have songs. Better.
They should. And yeah, I remember Moreno well. One of my best friends, a Broncos fan, convinced he was going to be the next big thing. And yeah, he shined brightly, but shined briefly, right? So yeah.
Sadly, yes.
Yeah. So right, it's time to talk about the most maddening position in IDP, the DBs. We know there's a huge amount of turnover from year to year, Tom. So yeah, anything we come up with here is likely to be wrong, but we'll do our best. So Tom, who do you have for us here? Which DBs are you liking for week 1?
I'm not sure I'm going to pick anyone for liking, which is really bad, but I'm being on brand here. And I'll tell you what I'm not going to pick, because I think the process is better here. So that what I'm doing in week 1, probably most of the season, to be honest, is just taking whoever falls to me at value. I do not care. So here's the thing with DB. There's probably about 2, 3, maybe 5 guys who are distinguished at the top. But all those guys will get drafted way too early, like 5 rounds too early than you should do, because everyone goes, "Oh, I need that guy." They're going to go after whoever the hell it is, Kenny Moore, or last year it was Jalen Petra. Do you remember he was getting drafted like 5 rounds ahead of everybody else? And how'd that work out, pals? Because that happens all the time. We know that turnover at defensive back is insane. It's absolutely absurd. You've got like 5% chance of repeating something like that. So I don't care. Everybody between 5 and 64 or whatever your number is all have the same value to me. So you guys go crazy, and I'll take my guy who I've got at number 25, who I draft at number 48, and I'm absolutely fine with that. So I'm deliberately not I'm making a good answer here, but I just don't care. Now, later in the season, I will do, because there'll be people I think are useful and people who've got good matchups, stuff like that. But at the moment, all I'm doing is playing value, and it's opportunity cost. So it's not, well, you could draft that guy in the 17th round or 26th round or whatever it is. It's no, the guy I can get at a different position where there's way more chance of actually being good at that position in the same 17th round or wherever I'm looking has got way more chance. So I'm going to do that. Throw your darts when you've got good bets on it, and throw your bad darts much later on. That was mixing my metaphors really badly, but you know what I mean.
I love a mixed metaphor. So let me put this to you. I've got 2 things to put to you, actually. So looking at that IDP ADP from the IDP show Best Ball Drafts, Winfield is the safety 1, as you'd imagine. ADP of 46, 47. The aforementioned JOK is being drafted as the LB19 with an ADP of 52. Based on what you were just saying there, you'd take JOK every time?
Yeah, definitely, because it's upside. So I'm unconvinced of JOK, so I'm taking let's say 40% chance of it paying off. But if it does, I've got an extra top 30 linebacker, which is valuable and useful because there's not enough of those guys to go around. So 12-team league, let's say you're starting 3 linebackers, you're right at the end of having those guys even before bye weeks kick in. So that is valuable. It's hard to get hold of them. The other guy, we were talking about Antoine Winfield. Sure, he's a starting safety, but he's likely to be roughly as good as every other starting safety, and there's 64 of those. So I want a lower chance of getting something good rather than a high chance of getting something that's not good.
I knew you'd say that. I just wanted to tee you up to hear your rants, which I love, Tom. They are like one of my favorite things. No, don't be sorry. I did it on purpose.
Can I tell you my bad analogy? I'm going to do this. So I was reading this good book recently, Alistair Reynolds' book, and they were having a fight between spaceships. I promise I'll get to the point. And one spaceship made all these fake missiles, like hundreds of fake missiles, and sent them over. And then you put a real warhead in like 1 in 100 of these. Where the point was the defending spaceship had to destroy every single warhead, because you never know, right? If you just go, oh, there's only 1 in 100 got a warhead, we'll only stop half of them, you're going to get blown up. And that's not going to happen. So I think conceptually that low percentage chance of massive impact is similar there.
Yeah, as your analogies go, I've heard you do better. I'm not gonna lie to you. I've heard you do better, but hey, you're clearly well read, Tom, and for that we applaud you. I said I had 2 things to put to you in terms of your position on DBs. The second one is the guy that I like this week. I'm interested to hear your opinion on my argument for this guy. So I quite like Jeremy Chinn's chances to dig his way out of fantasy obscurity and become a solid IDP DB this year. And I think that change of scenery is exactly what he needed. I think he landed in a great spot. The Commanders were kind of thin in that secondary, traded away Cam Curl, obviously. And I like that Dan Quinn has talked about using Chinn in a role that is kind of like close to the line of scrimmage, which I think should help his tackle production. There's very little to gain, very little to glean, from Chinn's alignment in those preseason games. He's only played like 21 snaps across 2 games. So, but it's kind of encouraging, I think, that he spent 71%. I checked this earlier, 71% of his snaps in the box or up on that defensive line, which is kind of in keeping with what Quinn said, or how Quinn said he would be using Chinn. So, I mean, look, when all's kind of said and done, I can totally appreciate why some IDP managers may have completely lost patience with Chinn in recent years. But I do think that this is his best chance to be fantasy relevant in a while, right? So Tom, based on what you said earlier on about hating all DBs, hating them personally, do you share my confidence in this take on Chinn or no?
Yeah, I'd like it. I take your logic. Now he's slightly above some of the other guys. What I like about him is Dan Quinn for the last 2 or 3 years really has led the NFL, been right there in terms of 3 safety sets. So we can be very, very sure he's going to be on the field. And I don't mean like the third guy we're going to call a safety, but he's playing in the slot like Brian Branch or something like that. Like bona fide 3 safeties, and they'll move around a little bit and be flexible, which I love because safety is my favorite player in the position in the NFL, and it's flexible, interesting, and versatile. So I love Jeremy Chinn. I expect him to play a bit in the slot and a bit in the box rather than be an old-fashioned box banger. And obviously got Bobby Wagner there. Over the last 12 to 15 years, there's been probably 3 NFL players who duck the trend of tackle efficiency as just a random stat and everyone evens out. Bobby Wagner and Luke Kuechly were 2 of them. So any safety behind him, you go, he's probably going to have a few fewer tackles because Bobby Wagner, even at this point in his career, is going to hoover some up. I like Jeremy Chinn. I've got him at safety 23 at the moment, and I suspect you can draft him quite a bit later than that because you're right. People have gone, I was burnt by him for a couple of years. I'm never touching that guy again because we all make decisions like that. So sure, yeah, maybe if he's sitting there in the 30s or whatever, I might treat myself.
I hear you. So look, Tom, based on your previous comments, this next question should be a really easy one for you then. So DBs that you dislike this week, who do you hate?
So I'm going to take Brian Branch, and I hate him at value. Now, I love him as a player. I think he's absolutely fascinating. I think he's really good as a rookie. The lines are obviously a bunch of fun, even though it's really hard to see the numbers on the jerseys, and I'll never forgive him for that. But Brian Branch, you didn't mention earlier, you talked about Winfield, and I can't remember who it was, and you didn't say Branch. Last I saw, he was getting drafted as 3, 4, 5, something like that. It was right up there.
DB5.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I think he's got a lot of potential to burn someone, and not because he's a bad player. And they've said all the right things in your season. Oh, he's going to play a bit at safety. He's going to be closer to a full-time player. Blah 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 blah. Sure. Everyone says nice things about every player in the offseason. I'm still not convinced he's a full-time player. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier. If he's a 90% player, then he's still giving up an unacceptable lead to another 40 or 50 guys who I can pick up of waivers. So why would I do that? So I don't hate him as a player. Has he got a good chance of doing well? Sure, he absolutely has. There's going to be 24 top 24 DBs by definition out of whatever there's 120 guys there. So he's got a 20% chance of having a really good week, and that would be great. I wouldn't be shocked to see it at all. But am I investing in DB5 to go for that? Absolutely not.
Yeah, you'll get no argument from me there. I think Branch is, as you said, like a really good player, right? He wasn't that every down guy last year. I think he has a shot at being an every down guy this year, but that doesn't really move the needle much in terms of the point you were making there in your argument, right? So those DBs, there's just so much turnover. I'm not going to be that guy who drafts the top 10, but maybe the top 20 DBs. I'm happy to pick up a Chuck Clark, a Julian Blackman later in the end of the draft rounds. So yeah, that'll always be me.
Julian Blackman. Now we're talking. There's a big heart from last year, and he was an obvious one last year to go for because we saw him preseason and we saw how they were going to use him, and it illustrates one of those points, which is, with safeties in particular, people tend to look at what they've done in the past and they think he's that sort of safety, he's that sort of player, therefore he does that thing. And it's not true. Safety is the most versatile position in the NFL, and the same safety for different coaches or a third different coach and a different scheme will be asked to play a very different role. They're not all pigeonholed. Is that a term? Pigeonholed.
It is.
So be really careful of those. It sounded wrong.
No, you're spot on. You're spot on. I was just looking at a sleeper draft there. I'm currently drafting in, and those are the guys I was picking up. The Blackmans, the Branch types. Trying to pick another name out here that I've just grabbed here. So yeah, I'm like, Richie Grant, Jordan Fuller. I'm happy to get these guys because they have a shot at outproducing some of these guys being drafted in that top 10 at the position, and that's something I'll sleep soundly tonight, right? So
with you,
that's not a problem.
One more player I've got about as well. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you go. Cooper
DeJean of the Eagles. I really like him as a player. It's just, let's cut to the chase. It's too early in the season to trust him. Same argument was with Colson, right? That Eagles secondary was terrible last year. They've overhauled that unit now, though, for 2024. Added a bunch of really talented guys, and they have a couple of guys returning who missed significant time, Slay, Maddox, etc. So I think it's going to look like DeJean is going to be in a part-time role to begin with. I know a lot of people got really excited about him or his potential as a punt returner. Maybe he was getting a bit of that sort of Keyshawn Nixon treatment. But I think their punt returner from last year, Covey, he's made the 53. Hopefully he sticks. He's a return specialist, a pretty good one at that. And you have to think they're going to keep him around for a reason, right? He's not making the roster because of what he contributes as a receiver. So yeah, all things considered, I definitely think DeJean should become, I think, one of the better DBs in time. But for now, and certainly in week one, I'm sitting him. What's your thoughts, Tom?
It's a good shout, and I'm really interested in him as a kick returner because obviously the rules have changed, so we're expecting to see a lot more kick return. Whether your league values that or not is obviously different. If you don't even score in it, then ignore that. And also because of the way that rule is set up, you've got 9 guys that are fixed, right, and you've got that spare number 11 guy you've got the receiver and 9 guys, and then you've got the other one. So some teams are going to put 2 guys back there. In old school, when you had a receiver on either time, and we're going to see a couple of teams do some interesting stuff. So is there a role for 2 different receivers on the field? There might be. I don't know. So I suspect, I think we'll see quite a few return yardage points going out this year in leagues that don't expect it, and they're all going to run around next year and they're going, that's not fair, we're going to change it, we want to change the rules and everything. But there is an opportunity to get an advantage here. Even if it doesn't happen, it's an opportunity. So I've got Cooper DeJean in a handful of dynasty rookie drafts, just because he was sitting there. You get to the 6th or 7th round and you're going none of these guys are going to play in the NFL, they're all bums anyway. You might as well gamble on that. So yeah, could it fail and not do anything? Absolutely, but it's better. Like we talked about earlier, it's a low percentage chance of a high impact result rather than a middle % chance of a low impact result. Yeah,
I get that. I think Covey is going to be the guy. Sorry to go back to my last point. They got that receiver from the Aggies in the 5th round as well, whose name I forget, who has also been, doing a lot of returns in the preseason. Yep. I think DeJean's only returned once, and you'd have to imagine they'd be trying him out there, having a look at what he's got. I just don't think he's going to be that guy that we all want him to be. That sort of 75% plus snap volume as a DB plus the punt returner duties, maybe in time. But yeah, certainly this comes back to, as I say, my earlier point with Colson. Why take a massive gamble in week one? Week one is as important 100%. As any other game in that regular season for our, us as fantasy managers. So in week one, I'm going to trust that veteran, because that's what NFL teams do. So I'm just not going to take that gamble. Not again. I don't hate him as a player. I think he's a really good player, and I'd love to have him in dynasty leagues, especially if we're starting 3-4 DBs. I'm all in, but just not for week one.
Yeah, I'm with you. At week one, just don't make bad decisions, right? Because a load of weird stuff is going to happen, and that's fine. Just make really sensible decisions, and don't necessarily chase the upside now. It's a long season. You're going to have plenty of time to get those guys in the lineup. Just go sensible and hope the other guys paid less attention to you and starts a bunch of duds.
Absolutely. Any other DBs you want to hate on, Tom, before we skip on to the winner of our poll this week?
Yeah, one I was going to do, and again, I'll touch on quite quickly because I've talked about the reason. Jessie Bates. So Jessie Bates was that guy who had an amazing season last year. He was absolutely brilliant. Sure, Antoine Winfield was brilliant as well, but Jessie Bates was right up there. But there was no real reason for it. Like, Jessie Bates has been a career deep safety that does have a lower tackle efficiency. That's part of the way that position is played. And last year, he still played deep, and it just shot up. And that happens, and sometimes you see it, and it's not that unusual and great. If you had him on your team, brilliant. I hope he worked out really well for you. It could happen again. I can think of examples where that has happened, but probably not. And again, going back to ADP, we've listed all the DBs. I suspect he's 3 or 5, who I don't think we've said yet. I bet he's getting drafted that high, and I wouldn't touch that.
Oh, I'd be surprised if he wasn't. Yeah, he's hell of a year last year.
Yeah,
arguably the second best. I reckon probably the second best safety in the league.
Yeah,
he's
even top, depending on your tackles versus big plays split. He was the top defensive back in some leagues.
No, it's got to be Winfield, surely. And while I look, Tom, tell us your opinion on did Winfield deserve the defensive MVP of the year? I love putting you on the spot.
I don't hate the fact he won it. And as we said, I'm a giant fan of safeties, right? So anytime a do-it-all flexible safety gets an award, brilliant. I'm really, really happy with that. I probably would have gone for one of the pass rushers myself. But yeah,
Garrett won it, didn't he? And there was a lot of furore over the idea that Winfield didn't. Bates was DB6. DB6, yeah, that's...
Yeah, Winfield getting left out of the Pro Bowl was the moment that got everybody up in arms. And, everyone goes mad and goes, the Pro Bowl doesn't do this. And you go, look at the rest of the Pro Bowl. Like, starting Pro Bowl teams have 6 pass rushers and 1 linebacker on them. and you're telling me that's not realistic? You idiot. Learn how to look at a team.
Yeah, so Bates' career, I'm looking at his stats right now, career numbers in terms of tackles, career numbers in terms of interceptions, career numbers in terms of forced fumbles. You can't draft him based on only what he did last year. Not when we've got a body of work of 5 other seasons to look upon. The counterpoint to that argument, I suppose, is that did he elevate his game in the new scheme on the Falcons, and is this who he is now? But going back to our earlier points about DBs, I think we've kind of probably already answered that one, haven't we? Okay, so as I said at the top of the show, we are every week going to end the preview show by talking about the player who our listeners have voted on in our weekly poll on X. And the player who won the week 1 poll by a landslide with 63% of the votes was Rams linebacker Omar Speights, who, if the rumor mill is to be believed, was thrust into an every down role after Ernest Jones was traded. Right, Tom?
Well, that's what people are saying. What you believe is quite different. I don't think it's impossible, but like so many other things that we talked about, I'm not betting on it in the moment. Now, have I gone out and grabbed a share or two that were just sitting there? Yes, absolutely. Because again, low cost, high upside. But Christian Rosenboom is there, Troy Reeder's there, both of whom have been on the team a lot longer. Arguably are higher in the pecking order, have played in the NFL before, weren't undrafted free agents. Well, maybe they were, but not just now. So at the moment, we just don't know. So this is, like we keep saying, just go for sensible things in the first week. Now, is it worth having them on your roster if you've got a space? Cool. Yes, it absolutely is. You don't need that fourth cornerback that people continue to hold. Are you going to start them in week one? Absolutely not. That would be madness. Definitely don't do that.
Yeah, it'll come as no surprise based on my previous comments on some of these other guys. But yeah, I'm right there with you. We haven't agreed on everything tonight, Tom, but we're going to agree on Speights. I like you. I get the excitement, right? McVay and Snead have talked him up. He looked really good in very limited, almost meaningless preseason action, and that depth chart, that linebacker depth chart in LA is not insurmountable. Those guys you mentioned there, they're not like great players, right? But I have no shame in admitting that I am one of those people as well who rushed out to add him from waivers in some of my leagues, hoping that he'll kind of inherit that role. It was the right thing to do, the sensible thing to do. But for now, in week one, it's too early to anoint him the starter. We don't know what that snap share is going to look like. It might well be a division of duties among 2, 3, possibly even 4 guys, if we include Hummel in that too. So, yeah, I mean, the guy's played 27 snaps in the preseason. I'm not ready to trust him in week one. If I'm desperate for that much linebacker help, I've done something wrong in constructing my rosters. I kind of just want to see how things kind of play out first.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's worth reiterating that one. If you're looking at a roster and go, I'm not quite sure I've got enough full-time linebackers in week one before bye weeks kick and before injuries kick, then unless something weird happens, you're going to win the league. So it's just not going to happen. You've got a hole there. Now, could he be a solution to that? Yeah, sure he could. But you don't need to gamble on that right now. And if you do, you've done it wrong.
Absolutely. Okay, look, Tom, that's a wrap for the week one show. Here, the preview show on the IDP After Show. Tom, it's been great to have you on, my friend. I said this to you before we started the show. I like the way that you look at this stuff. There's anyone that follows you and your work probably appreciates. There's none of that sort of sensationalism and the hyperbole that sometimes sounds good, but which is often only there to kind of stoke engagement. So it's rare. Please never change. We're grateful for having you come on. Please tell our audience where we can find more of your good work this year.
Well, thanks for having me on first. I really appreciate it, dude. You're a generous man. You'll be able to find me in 2 places this year. So one, I write for DLF, Dynasty League Football, and I'm definitely trying to put out a weekly article every week, which will be IDP stats to pay attention or not pay attention to every week. So that's going out. Let's see how well that goes. And the other place I'll be sporadically sharing stuff on X, which, is a weird choice for a platform anyway. My boss just got used to work there, used to be in the leadership team in the UK, and he's got loads of trouble for doing an interview about it. So I won't say what his name is. Anyway, we have an interesting professional relationship with the platform, but I'll definitely be on there sharing charts and numbers and bits and pieces about what I think. So catch me up there. Let's have a chat about football.
I look forward to the charts, and again, I'll embarrass you a little bit by mentioning the Defensive Handbook. It's one of the resources that you bring out every year. It's fantastic. I look at it all the time for tidbits of information that I might have either overlooked or just did not know. If anyone listening or watching us on YouTube right now is not aware of that Defensive Handbook, then please check it out. I think it's pinned to the top of your profile on X. Is it not, Tom?
Honestly, I don't know. If it's not, I probably will put it there because it's a bit of a labor of love. And the reason I do that is the reason I got into IDP is I wanted to know more about football. When I got in, sorry, I'm going to go slightly off tangent. When I got in football, there was lots of people talking about offense, and it was relatively easy to find out what's going on. And there just wasn't much about defense at all. And I quickly realized that the stuff that people do say is just nonsense. They're just saying words that they've heard before in a certain audio, and they keep saying it. You know, nickel is the new base. People say that all the time, even now. And you're like, well, yeah, technically it's true, but it has been for 20 years. So if you think that is any sort of insight, you're sorely mistaken. Anyway, it just didn't exist there. And the more I delved into it, the more I felt there was skin deep stuff, which is, you know, at the start of the game, the 11 players turn up and introduce themselves, and that's your starting lineup. And knowing that is like the most basic, obvious wrong thing you can know. Or there's people that get playbooks and, you know, learn every single different, you know, 3-choice coverage responsibility in whoever's playbook. And there wasn't a lot in between it. So the handbook is trying to give people enough information on the defensive side of the football so they know what to watch for, and they understand how different defenses in the NFL operate differently without having to put 1,000 hours of study into obscure stuff.
Well, we appreciate you putting 1,000 hours of study into putting together that handbook, because it really is fantastic, and it'll make any of our people listening or watching us tonight a better IDP manager for doing so. So please do check it out. So thanks again, Tom. It's been a blast. To our audience, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching us on YouTube, thanks for tuning in. I hope you found my ramblings and Tom's wonderful insight helpful in your quest to dominate your IDP leagues this year. Please let us know what you thought of our debut episode. And don't forget to subscribe on our channels to make sure that you don't miss out on this show and all of our other great shows in this, our guest interview feed, where you can hear from the smartest voices in IDP every week. Bye for now.
This was the IDP After Show.